Alrighty, so we're just gonna go ahead and get started. It's recording. Let's share my screen. Oop. Alrighty, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is my open editorial, and this is right here about virtual school not being the same as real school. It's by Adam S. I can't pronounce his last name. He is a teacher in Baltimore. He's been teaching for 23 years. He is also a writer who was just named who just got a prize in October in Washington Writers Publishing House. Sorry, I'm gonna make this bigger. Okay, continuing on. Right here is my pathos, because this whole bolded section is talking about the story of Bryant, who is a high school senior who loses his mom. This is a year before the pandemic. So he's lost his mom and he's like going to school and school less. This is where the syntax come in because Mr. S encourages him to stay here, but then the dash creates the emphasis like, hey, Brian, you also have a few classes left to graduate, so you should just stick with it. But in the end, Brian ends up leaving and life hits him. He gets a job, lives with the girlfriend, pays bills, life. So then going on to my next thing, I chose for rhetorical device, I said personification only because buildings, they don't have like the ability to be quiet as like humans, we can be quiet, but buildings, I kind of made the stretch of saying, oh, buildings can't really be quiet. They don't have like a voice or a mouth to be quiet. So that's what I said for that one. Moving on, this was also another pathos for me because this was a moment where he was sharing with his student Brian, like having a conversation one-on-one, just two men talking about the loss of their mothers. And that really affected me because I still have some of my teachers in my life where I can just forget everything else and just have a one-on-one conversation about anything with them. So I chose that for pathos as well. Oh, sorry, it's cold. Next, moving on, is the logo. So the whole point and idea around this article was to say that virtual school is not enough for kids or teenagers in school nowadays. They need the face-to-face intimacy with teachers and students because in the end, students will not go to school or they just never began in the first place because of virtual. And this one I chose as a metaphor because it's stating that virtual is almost school. So it's comparing virtual school to regular school, which is really not what he's trying to get through. Like, it's not going to be the same because you're not going to have that relationship with teachers or those friend relationship with other students as well. And then for my syntax, I chose this one right here because he's basically asking the questions with the same phrase, when you're. So this one I identified with the most because when COVID first happened, I had to do this with my siblings, basically saying, when your parents or someone is at work, it's on you to help your younger siblings, or when you're worried about finding food, or when you're worried about this or that. So the anaphora is that when you're doing something, it's not letting you be able to get through school and that stuff. Okay. Another metaphor I chose was real school can be a lifeline. Basically, a life what it's trying to compare is like students need school and to be able to kind of survive life in itself, because without school we have to deal with those things like Bryant did without school because he had to get a job, pay the bills, but as well as he puts real schools where people can connect and grow and be appreciated and rewarded for their talents and stuff. So this is where he gets that real school is a lifeline. So that's where he gets that comparison. And then finally, the last syntax I have is a simple sentence, the simple short sentence, which is basically saying, but it's different now. So he's talking about last year with Bryant, and this is before COVID, and he needs Bryant to like come back and do it. So Bryant graduates. He goes back to school and graduates, but now he's saying it's different because now we have to deal with the vaccinating teachers and making sure the safe school is safe to open, as well as helping kids who were, like he says, left. Oh, oops, don't want to mess it up. Like he says, left behind during virtual learning. So that simple sentence takes a shift into the article saying like, virtual schools, they're not going to be good enough for students because they need some of the students, they've been left behind due to virtual schools because they don't have that connection with teachers or friends, or I'm gonna say motivation to go to class, because like he said earlier that some people weren't even showing up for class. So that is my op-ed. Now moving on to part 2 of this, which is talking about fallacies and bias. So the topic I chose was COVID-19. So the middle-centered article I chose was through Associated Press. They're really good with not creating bias and not doing the two sides of the spectrum. They present facts and like support it. So for this one, it's talking about how the US numbers have dropped after the Pfizer vaccines came out. So right here, just like already saying that the US has dropped over the past couple of weeks. Even though we still have high levels, it's dropped ever since the vaccine came out. But then there's also this urgent race for a new vaccine because of the new mutating virus that's in the UK. It's also surfaced in South Africa. So basically, this article is just tying around that the US, we have a vaccine, numbers are dropping, but then we also have a new strand that we need to figure out how to, sorry, I'm really cold, I'm shaking, that we need to contain and figure out, can this new virus be helped by the vaccines that we already have? And within the article, it already says that they don't really know if it can, but they're still testing and making sure that it can. And then if not, we're probably going to have a race to a new vaccine. Okay. So this one is by Palmer Report, and this is on the left side of the bias spectrum. So beginning, we already have this fallacy right here, which is begging the question. So in this article, we have the scientist named Holden Thorpe, who's kind of not happy with Trump because Trump has been basically saying that the virus, he claims that Trump does not believe that the virus is like that big of a deal, and then also as well as that Trump doesn't believe in the science. So right here, he's saying that Trump neglected, abused, and belittled science, and then just because he did that, it put Americans at grave risk. And now that Americans are grave risk, he was reckless and incompetent to realize that science is important, and now we're in a horror show called the coronavirus. So it's basically going full circle, blaming Trump for the coronavirus, even though we can't really blame him for it. That's what I believe. And then this one is the slippery slope, basically saying that he lies, covers up, and then we now have to resort to saving America because, and he was this, and that because, sorry, I'm repeating. Basically slippery slope because he was this, and that. He did this, and that, and then now we have to save America because we are in the middle of a pandemic. And then finally, we have an O ad hominem, which is basically Thorpe finally calling Trump just a man-child because he's the one who basically said that science is not really needed. And now that we're in a pandemic, Trump is relying on science. And basically now Thorpe is saying that America's antidote is to get rid of a man-child, which is not really talking about the problem of coronavirus. He's just mainly stating like, he's just mainly bashing on Trump's character because we're in a pandemic and now we had to like put all resources into a virus that we could have stopped, but Trump wants to cut off science wise. Sorry. And then this is our last one. This is on the right side of the spectrum, and this is basically from American Thinker. They talk about multiple topics in their articles, but for right now, because this one talks about COVID, but then also voter fraud and then political chaos. So right now we're just going to focus on the COVID part. So for this one, they talk about the vaccine, both of them, Pfizer's and Moderna's, and that they're both being out to the world. But in this paragraph right here, they're saying that it could have been avoided using this drug. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I'm calling it HCQ. So basically, HCQ was a drug that this doctor found from Yale, basically saying that it could help with the symptoms and stop the likelihood of death, and you can basically get better with it if you had COVID. So he did this research, but then found out later it was tested by the FDA and American College of Cardiology, and they found that it did not help with COVID. It basically was just a pointless drug that you were going to take, and then but it wouldn't help with your symptoms or wouldn't help stop the stop you from getting COVID or you getting COVID, making you feel better. So that's where that came in. So then we go into, I called this one right here, probably should highlight this whole thing. If the public uses, he's saying that it could have saved 75,000 to 100,000 people. I said that was a hasty generalization because there are around 7 billion people in the world. So comparing this number to billions, I kind of strayed to hasty generalization because you're not putting it into the world perspective, because the whole world's affected by this, not just us, the US. And then it was also leading to a slippery slope because it was saying if we did HCQ, then we would have fewer deaths, and then we wouldn't have these lockdowns, and then we wouldn't worry about vaccines. But at the same time, he was so focused on this and that we could have been done early that he didn't look at the science of it and realize that HCQ doesn't work. So that's where I got this slippery slope from. And then also, I said this one was a strawman fallacy only because he's bashing that politics was the reason that HCQ was rejected and not the science. So he's not proving that, hey, the science is the reason why it got rejected. He's blaming the government of why the government, or politics, not government, politics, government, that HCQ is not able to be used. And then, which also led into a slippery slope by saying that results would be more likely if we use HCQ, that we would avoid deaths, hospitalizations, and lockdowns. But maybe the reality is, if we did use it, maybe we wouldn't have these. Maybe we'd still have these lockdowns and more deaths and more hospitalization. So yeah, alrighty. That's all I have. But I want to say thank you and for watching, and to people who have more videos, good luck. Thank you. Let's see if I can end it.